Hi, everyone. Welcome to another webinar here that we're hosting here with Syntasso. This is our third in the series, and we're going to be talking today about when Terraform met Backstage and having a fireside chat here about good platform abstractions. So I think Daniel's going to kick us off with a little bit of an intro, and then we're going to get straight into that chat.
Thank you very much, Abby. Let me just share my screen. Fantastic. Hopefully everyone can see that following along. It's great to see so many folks rocking up to the stream. As a quick TLDR, we're talking about sort of three layers of platforms today. We're talking about the application layer, which we all know and love as portals, as UIs, the UX of the actual platform itself. We're going to be talking about platform orchestration, the API and the lifecycle, and then also the infrastructure layer you will know and love with things like Crossplane, Terraform today, of course, but infrastructure as code. There are best practices for integrating Backstage and Terraform. We'll look at some of that. Abstractions, APIs, and plugins are the key. And the future of internal developer platforms is very much bright, but please don't be like a moth to the technology flame, right? I've certainly played that. I'm sure all of us on the call have done that to some degree. Best to stay away from that bright light of technology at times. Our panelists for today, you've got myself and Abby, as you've seen on many talks, but we're super excited. Very kindly, Seve Kim has agreed to join us, product manager from Backstage. Seve, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure thing. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, my name's Sevi. Nice to meet everyone. I am a product manager working at Spotify for Backstage. I've had experience in the industry working on developer tools, API platforms for the past 8 or 9 years. I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sevi. Myself and Abby have used a whole bunch of Terraform over our careers as well. So between us all, we're going to cover the Terraform angle, the Backstage angle, and that platform sort of orchestration, that middle layer we're talking about as well. So setting the scene, why should you care? Well, platform engineering, if you don't know, is a big thing, right? The Gartner folks have very much put it on the sort of peak of inflated expectations. A whole bunch of folks are looking at platform engineering now, looking at building platforms. We've been building platforms for years, but this term of platform engineering is really coming together now. Very much a strategic trend that Gartner have identified. We're saying, and many of the folks are talking about platform as a product, treating your platform as a product, building it intentionally, building it for customers. ThoughtWorks have been all over that. I'm actually very lucky today. 2 ex-ThoughtWorkers on the call. Both Abby and Sevi have been ThoughtWorkers. And myself, I've worked at OpenCredo, a very similar company based in the UK as well. But consultancies get to see the patterns, the interesting patterns going on in the industry and report back. So platform as a product, definitely a thing. We've talked about that in previous webinars. But today we're going to focus a little more on the platform architecture. And I appreciate this slide is an eye chart. Do not worry, we're going to share the slides later. The most important thing today is the conversation. We can break down the charts later, but just very quickly, like it's our chart on the left and Gartner's on the right. With the two of us are talking about 3 layers in the platform: the portal, where you're sort of choreographing or orchestrating your platforms. Sorry, I'll start again. Where the first layer is platform choreography, where you're using your portal to bootstrap your applications, and basically that's your sort of portal into the platform itself. You've got the platform orchestration layer, which is the API of the platform, the workflows, the policies, the guidance, the guardrails, all going on encapsulated within that layer. And then we've also got that infrastructure layer, the cloud, Terraform, Crossplane, infrastructure as code, all that good stuff. And I think we see a lot of folks talking about the application choreography layer, a lot talking about the infrastructure, not so many talking about this middle portion, this platform orchestration. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the APIs and the abstractions. We're going to really sort of try and join the dots between Backstage and Terraform. That's where the most interesting conversation is to be had, I think. So let's gather around the fire, right? This is the most important thing. We've got some ChatGPT generated artwork. I was just saying off mic, I had a real hard time generating 3 chairs. it was for some reason ChatGPT wanted 4. We couldn't get around that, but eventually we did. And I want to kickstart the conversation today. And Sevi, I don't know if you want to take this one first. What do you think are the key abstractions for building an internal developer platform and portal? And I'm guessing you can look at this from various different personas like developer, platform engineer, leadership. I'd love to hear your thoughts and any direction you'd like to go.
For sure. I would maybe just start off with, like you mentioned, like who are you building the internal developer platform for? I think in most cases, there's this sort of dance or relationship between platform engineers and then the actual developers or people who are working on the products themselves. In most cases, I think at the end of the day, you're wanting to provide either self-service capabilities, whether it's provisioning, automating essentially improving the lives and the experience of your developers at the end of the day. And so that being said, I think you want to work backwards from those customers, those users. What are they needing to do? What does their workflows and what are they trying to accomplish? I think a lot of times I've seen scenarios where you sort of start with technology. You start with, hey, these are the existing APIs and capabilities we have. What can we kind of push upwards and then just expose with a UI or a one-click thing? When in reality, there's many different things, many different parts of the workflow that you're needing to consider when you're pushing those things up. So I think it's a bit an abstract thing to say, but I think one of the key things is really understanding where does your user, aka the developer, start. What are they needing to accomplish, and then work backwards from there.
I think that's a really good point when it comes to the difference in outcome when you start from the user experience or the end result versus when you start from the implementation, the back end. Because when you're starting from that user experience, you can often do pretty much anything you want at the end of the day on the server side, on the back end. And you're really making sure you're delivering the experience people are looking for. Versus if you start with that technology, often you start to feel like you're being forced down a certain type of interface or interaction model for your users because that's what your tools are pushing you towards. But I think the other thing I was thinking about when you were speaking there, Sevi, is when you start from the top and you're hearing what people need and how you can support these teams in delivering business value through their applications. I find that you're going to hear some things lots of times and some things really uniquely. And this is a really interesting part because there's a conversation of like how much of your use cases should a platform cover? And in my experience, a platform should be covering the things that are common to a number of teams. It might not be 100% of your teams, but enough of your teams that it has a good return on investment. And where it's not, you enable a DevOps mentality and skill set so that they can build what they do need on top of the things that are shared. And then from the other side, what you're trying to do is only build the things that are unique to your business. So in summary, I think platforms are about building the things that are unique to your business, so not common to the industry, but common to the teams within your business. And that's where if you focus on those, you're really building the high value things rather than spending your time on either commodities from the industry or edge cases within your business that aren't viable to be supported.
100%. And I think sometimes I've also heard like, well, where these teams or these companies will consider the build versus buy. And it sometimes is looked at as a binary of like, I either have to go all in and just like buy all the SaaS, or we have to build this all internally. I think you have the choice to do both, being able to determine like what capabilities that you have and are very niche and aren't really solved by the tools in the market today. And ones that you can say, hey, look, like this does the job. Let's go ahead and see how it can integrate with the existing flows that we do have.
I love that discussion. As you were talking there, both of you are sort of reminded of Wardley maps. I don't know if you've both bumped into Simon Wardley and Wardley maps, talking about sort of that drift towards commoditization. It's being really focused on what is a commodity, like maybe the infrastructure as code is a commodity, and some part of the portal framework is, but there's some logic that you need to put in there for your specific use case. And that is very much the early stage, and you need to apply different sort of I guess requirements, different approaches in what you're building versus buying at those different spaces. If that makes sense.
And I think that's the thing I'm most excited about within. I mean, I'm excited about so many things that Team Topologies has brought to the world and to the conversation topic. But I wrote a whole blog post about thinnest viable platform versus minimum viable platform and why those are not mutually exclusive and actually should be brought together. But the reason thinnest viable is such an interesting addition that Team Topologies has brought into the conversation is because that Wardley map is not static that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Things drift towards commodity over time. And so how do you manage that drift? How are you able to take on board commodities as they become more cost effective to buy? And that is a big part of long-term success for a business. Just yesterday or this week, I was having a conversation with someone about building their own platform versus using some tools around in the market and things. And they were like, well, we do have this internal. We're probably okay with what we've been building. And I was like, I appreciate you probably have a lot of really great things, but everyone had their own internal cloud before AWS came along and GCP and so forth. And there was a point in which that turned over to being more cost effective to purchase from the commodities from the market. And there was a gray area there that, depending on how much you would invest in your data centers, you may be needed to be an earlier or later adopter to it. But that's sort of, I think, the phase we're in with platforms right now. Everyone has a platform, and it's just a matter of how much they've invested and whether or not the things available in the market are starting to tip over to where it's worthwhile, that investment into the buying of the commodity or using of those.
Yeah, perfectly said. Perfectly said. Let's dive in now to specific tech, just to sort of like, definitely Backstage is very much still on the hearts and minds, I think, of developers in the portal, the application choreography layer. And Sevi, we're super happy to have you on board here and like being very much an expert in this space. Can I tap you for what is the biggest benefits and challenges with folks adopting Backstage for their portal?
For sure. I think I can answer it with one on both what is the biggest benefit as well as the challenges, like the customization that it provides. I think where, Abby, you talk about thinnest viable platform is a place where a Confluence page or, a README, it's like being able to provide just enough information for someone to kind of complete the job that they need to accomplish or the workflow that they need to do. Where I think things can get quite hairy with Backstage is that you can take that as far as you really want. And I think in sometimes, like when you're given something that's so customizable, it's easy to kind of like fall into the path of, well, we need to automate and templatize all the things. When in reality, coming back to our first point of what key abstractions do you need to put within your portal or your the UI, it comes down to what is the user really needing. And so there was a path where I had seen scaffolder and software templates being used to pretty much just start a bootstrapped Java app. However, it had taken users through like 20 to 25 different steps, asking down to the level of like, how much compute and storage are you needing on this application? When in reality, like, sure, you can let people, take it to the granularity to that. But at the end of the day, someone's likely just wanting to spin something up quickly, test an idea. And then there's likely a day two path where, hey, we probably need to increase the storage that we have, or how do I go about scaling the solution out? So I think there's still a fine line that we're trying to get to with our new product portal that really starts to alleviate and helps guide you down the path of, sure, you have the extensibility to expand this out, but in reality, like, you just need to solve the problem in which your users and your developers are needing to be solved.
Love it, Sevin. Very much. I'm liking your call out to always thinking about what the customers need. Like even the technology space, like always thinking about what the customers need is really important. Really like your play around the extensibility challenges. We see this even with Kratix, our open source platform orchestration framework. You can do everything, and that's like bewildering for some folks, right? And you almost want to do everything, and then you've really got to pick a use case. To your point, pick a customer problem, a user problem, focus on building that out to prove value to folks. I mean, Abby, any thoughts on sort of the benefits and challenges? I know we bump into Backstage quite a bit in our daily work, don't we?
Yeah, no, I think that point about it being a framework and widely extensible in any way you want to go is actually why I love it, and also why I can appreciate it can be a challenge to figure out where to get started. But I think that's where we're maturing as an industry in our engineering capabilities at the platform level. We think about the fact that platform teams are really the first time when we're seeing application developer skill sets and infrastructure skill sets or ops skill sets really coming together to build a product together that's this internal. Obviously, you've had DevOps for a long time, but you see DevOps roles online because you have this one person sitting in the corner writing your CI/CD pipeline. All of a sudden, we're really trying to build that product, and I think that's the challenge: is how do you apply your product thinking to decide what fields are necessary, and how do you apply your engineering skill set to build sustainable, maintainable code that will mean that Backstage will continue to grow with you and evolve and change as you need to introduce new features and new capabilities. So, yeah.
Yeah, fantastically said, Abby. Should we switch gears now and look at the Terraform angle of this as well? And Abby, I'll throw back to you. I know, let's say, you've been using Terraform a whole bunch recently. What do you think the biggest benefits and challenges are with Terraform?
Yeah, I think Terraform, is it brought a lot of really big improvements to the infrastructure space. So it's still challenging to be the most testable framework in the world, or language in the world, but infrastructure can make that difficult, and they have brought more testability, more lintability, and things like that to the infrastructure as code space than a lot of tools previous to that. And with Terraform, you are able to use that HCL language for any API, right? It's not just public clouds, it's also SaaS products. It's really anything that has an API call behind it. You can use the same language, the same format, the same structure. And I think that allows for teams to ramp up in skill and use that skill kind of quite broadly, which is nice. But the fact that that is code, and that is a language, and that the code is often in the interface for the teams. So you're often also asking not just the people building Terraform on a day-to-day basis, but the people relying on the services Terraform provides to also learn HCL to a certain extent. I see a lot of times that code being treated as its interface, and people are actually, essentially forking repositories or pulling Terraform code into their repositories and trying to keep that stuff up to date and trying to take on new improvements to the modules that the internal teams are writing. And, keeping that going it can be a challenge. So I think it's done a lot of good for infrastructure, and I think where it struggles is with that interface that we're trying to build to the application developers.
Yeah, well said. I mean, any thoughts on that one, Sevi? Do you bump into Terraform much in your day job, or do you see like people trying to integrate with Backstage, for example?
I think in a past life, I was definitely writing Ansible scripts, before the days of Terraform. So I can totally empathize. I think I do see teams go about this. Maybe this is more for companies that are in the more 0 to 1 or kind of scale up space, but being able to feel that pain a bit of what does it mean to, have to kind of maintain those Terraform and get your team up to a certain pace. But at the end of the day, like, it isn't always relying on, let's say, developers sending tickets over to, SREs or platform engineers to do the work. But how do you sort of abstract and eat that complexity, and then push that up so that it's more self-serve? What makes sense to kind of provide to the end developer? So having syncretics and being able to kind of be that middle layer of having the promises, as you call, and be able to like abstract that away, I think it makes it easier to then have these composable building blocks that you then, push up into that kind of portal UI layer.
Thanks. Yeah, and that's a fantastic segue, actually. I was going to say, like, the next question, you read my mind, right? Before I looked at the slides. How should teams integrate their portal with infrastructure as code management? And Abby, do you want to follow on from? Thank you, Sevi, for the hat tip to Kratix there. We always appreciate that. Abby, do you want to sort of follow on from that?
Yeah, I think that what I see, the reason this feels like the right introduction or architecture to me is because I'm thinking about software architecture. And I'm thinking about the fact that in software architecture, you have the display layers. And I personally felt the pain of having too much logic in the display layer when we had to make a move for a major US airline I was working with at the time towards a more mature mobile offering across multiple platforms. And all of a sudden, we had to figure out why there was really key business logic in the user interface for the web portal and for their original mobile app, and try to pull all those into a shared place so we didn't have those issues, right? So software, we've learned that display is great for customizing that experience that someone has, but being able to share the business logic across multiple displays is really effective. Similarly, in software, we've learned the challenges of trying to have too much of that kind of database access layer things into that business logic. So it makes it untestable. It's not independent from the database. So trying to set up like a dev environment that you can test things, you really need to have that data set up, and that becomes challenging. So to me, this feels like where we've landed in software architecture, and we're just applying that to another type of software in platform architecture. And therefore having that controller layer between the two will enable both to be able to do the jobs that they're kind of both best suited for. And in an ideal world, that controller layer can also even support managing the displays, getting that information out to the displays where they need to, right? So.
Yeah, I like it, Abby. I like it. I mean, Sevi, have you got any experience in this space as well? Like, definitely as a previous Java developer or in a previous life, the three-tier architecture speaks to me. I just gravitate towards it, right? I feel comfortable like in that three-tier architecture, but with all the good reasons Abby mentioned. I mean, I don't know if you've got an experience of that, or you already mentioned about the Cratix providing a nice API, but any other thoughts? And I'm particularly curious around the kind of day two approach, because we bump into quite a few folks that start off with almost 2 layers and then realize as day 2, day 3, day 2000 comes up, they need that additional layer to provide that sort of single responsibility principle, separation of concerns, all that good stuff.
Yeah, maybe framing it slightly differently, like as you consider the end user of a developer building a product or an application for whatever company you have, I would assume that as they get started from day one, being able to provide that kind of very simplified, happy path will get them going and at least productive to kind of move forward without feeling a lot of friction. Daniel, as you're talking about day two, I think there's a concept in design called progressive disclosure, in which you really take the most simple path to them getting to a usable app or deployed set of resources. And then once they are able to kind of say, well, these are the set of configurations or the things that I'm needing to maybe update or change, I think you always have the opportunity to, over time, share more and more complexity as they need it. But I think what's important is, again, developers aren't looking to use a portal. They're not trying to add an additional tool into their workflow. Only it's when you start to remove some of that friction, then we're saying, okay, it's worth me kind of moving over to use, whatever IDP or portal tool that you have. And then over time, being able to consider, are there ways that I can tweak and change this without having to touch a bunch of Terraform code myself?
I love that, Sebi. And funny enough, it's the second time this week I've heard someone talk about progressive disclosure. I was on a panel yesterday, a lead dev panel with Shmuti Patel, and Shmuti mentioned that as well. And I was like, it's such a good thinking, like in terms of getting started day one, just a few fields, but then day two, I might need to have more fields on editing my properties with the application, with the infrastructure. I encourage folks, I'm certainly going to take this away and dive more into it, because when 2 people mentioned in 1 week this thing, I'm like, I need to think about this more. It's super interesting. I mean, Abby, I don't know if you bumped into that. Have you got any thoughts? Or
Yeah, I think honestly, I don't think I can add much more. I think that was a great way of describing the interactions and the what do you get access to or get asked for or have the ability to configure. I think that was brilliantly stated. I think I'll add a second additional worry when it comes to day two, which is who's in charge of these updates. So I think progressive disclosure is a great way of talking about, well, when I need access to something, how do I get it, just in time and not get overwhelmed by it too soon? But what happens when something needs to be updated, and who's in charge of that update process? Whether that be a security vulnerability that needs to be rolled out in a certain time frame, or whether that be a feature improvement that you want to upgrade the service to be able to take advantage of, and things like that. And this is where we talk, I think, so much more about that product thinking. Who owns those updates and upgrades is part of the design, that intentional design of your platform. There are parts of this that can and should be owned by the app developers. An app developer knows what version of database they're using because that has differences in the way they query it. But they may not care what patch version they're using, or maybe even not even what minor version they're using. They care about the query language, which is going to stay consistent within a major version. So where is the line that you draw with that platform? And do your infrastructure engineers, the people who know how to upgrade databases, know what versions are secure and those kind of things, have the ownership and capability to upgrade what they need to when they need to safely without bothering their app devs? And also, do the app devs have the ability to identify when an upgrade that would benefit them would be available and that they might want to engage with or test for, and those kinds of things? So that contract I find really important to the day two story.
Good example of that abstractions, those APIs, Abby, really important. So fantastic stuff. I've final slide. We've got 5 minutes left of the webinar. I wanted to give opportunity for us there. Any interesting case studies or interesting stories? I'm sure we've got, we literally chat for days on these things, right? But Sevi, as you're a guest there, I'd love to get your thoughts. So is there any interesting case studies you've seen with Backstage adoption or joining up the portal with the infrastructure that you can share publicly, of course, right?
For sure. Yeah. I had just caught I think it was a Google Cloud Next talk. There was a healthcare company using Backstage in tandem with GCP and Terraform for essentially how do they improve their path to production. I think the story goes is that they had started to realize and notice their lead time to market was just incredibly long, involving, I think it was around 8 teams, 2 to 3 months. And again, it wasn't the fact that they didn't have the skill sets or the capabilities, but sort of the way in which they've designed their organization. This person submits a ticket to this team, and that team is waiting on a request from someone else. I think where there was some intentionality to it was, what are things that are really needing to be a manual approval, or what is the risk of like putting that sort of like ticketing system in place versus I think slowly moving to, I think the time it took to kind of spin up a bootstrapped application with the necessary resources stood up, I think was in a span of an hour, which I think in a very regulated industry like healthcare, I think that's incredibly great. I think the other thing to know is that from the developer's experience using the Backstage instance in their portal was they had the ability to click that one software template. They filled out a couple fields and forms, and that process was just kind of writing out for them to kind of get access to. So at the end of the day, I think the lesson learned there is that they were exposing and leaking so much of that implementation detail throughout their processes, their forms, their ticketings, that they sort of took away and abstracted the need to kind of expose that to the end developer. When in the end of the day, they needed just a few fields, a button click or two, and then they were able to kind of get out of their own way.
Very interesting, Sarah. Yes, very interesting. We've definitely seen similar stories to that. Yes, I'll hopefully get some links we can share with folks in the audience as well, like if they want to follow up. I mean, Abby, we've got 3 minutes left. I appreciate this is putting you on the spot. Have you got like a 90-second case study or not?
I think I just say something that struck me in the last time that you were speaking, Sevi, was about how to get application developers to start using the portal. That's not their goal. Their goal is to have less friction and to get what they need. And I think, but portals at the same time are a really easy way to quickly make visible value a platform's building, right? It's something that everybody can witness, everyone can open up, everyone can see. So there's this draw to introducing something that's visual and supportive of people, but this reality that it has to actually reduce friction and not just look good. And it does look good, but do that. And so I think that the case study I'm thinking about is where an organization had been introducing Backstage, but struggling to meet that Terraform to Backstage connection. And so they were putting in things that, as you say, were very tied to their implementation and weren't actually adding a lot of value because people could do it already without Backstage. So why introduce a new bookmark? And when they were able to kind of coordinate their whole process, including those manual steps and everything else, using an API, using Cradix, and actually just create those visuals in Backstage, all of a sudden they were able to take things that were not possible with only Terraform. And they were able to actually change the experience when people were using Backstage. They were getting that manual approval without having to go walk over to people's desks and knock on people's doors and all that. And I think that's the thing that is really exciting when you take a process that is difficult and spans a lot of technology and you make it streamlined into the right location for people in that portal. I think that's the thing I'm really excited about.
Fantastic. I mean, I appreciate you, like in 90 seconds, that was just amazing. Thank you so much on that one. So thank you. This has been an amazing conversation. I've made a few notes as we're going along. I've definitely, from Sevi, I took from you, think about the customer, think about the end user, what the developers are trying to accomplish. Really, really important. Abby, I've got the architect intentionally is really key. build versus buy is important, and you made this point, Abby, it changes over time as the industry develops, as the company, your team develops as well. So be sort of aware of that. Wardley Maps, we gave a shout out to. Do think about the day two path, and Sevi mentioned about progressive disclosure. I know I'm going to be researching that a whole bunch more as well. And Abby mentioned who owns the updates to the components within your platform. Bunch of interesting case studies discussed. Thank you so much, Sevi, in particular, for joining us. Abby and I are here every month, but I know you've made a special effort to join us today. Really appreciate your time and all the knowledge you've dropped. I've made a bunch of notes. I'm going to be going away, writing some blogs and sharing more. But thank you so much for joining us, Sevi. Really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Fantastic. And thanks to the rest of the audience. We shall see you in the next event in a month's time. Thanks, everyone, so much.